Exclusive tutorials, study sheets, and storyboards are available on my Patreon. Hey, I'm Kai, a 90-year-old manga artist from the UK. Today I'm going to be going over how I personally do hair. We'll be going over some super basic things that you might have heard in a lot of different tutorials already. And we'll also go over some beginner mistakes or some things that you should look out for when you're actually drawing hair. On top of that, we'll also be going over how to draw black characters' hair. Naturally, a lot of this is going to be in an anime/manga style, so a lot of it's going to be simplifications of actual reality. Obviously, everything is based off, reality super loosely, but we're using it to create more interesting anime and manga characters. And hopefully a lot of the stuff in this video will be things that you can apply instantly right now and hopefully improve your hair drawing even just a little bit. Let's get right into some of the basics. First of all, you should be using a lot of different references when you're actually drawing hair, because I think this is going to be one of the hardest things to come up with on the spot when you're actually drawing different characters. So getting references from real life, or maybe references from anime or mangas that you like. For example, right here you can see I'm drawing a character from MHA. I'll probably reiterate this later, but references are super important. Next, I would suggest when you're drawing your hair and using your references, you should break your hair into 3 basic parts: the front, the sides, and the back. With this, not only will it make it easier to sort of part your hair, it will also make it a lot easier for you to add volume to your hair. This is partly because there'll be a lot more overlap when you're actually drawing your hair. On top of that, with the back part of the hair, you can always, go with a darker line or make some parts darker to show that it's further in the background. You notice that I'm making some parts of the back of the hair a lot darker because it really adds that additional depth to sort of the character itself. And it's little things like this that, drawing in parts can really help with. And it makes it easier to draw already existing characters because you don't have to focus on too many things at once. Next, we'll quickly go over sort of origin points for hair. All hair converges from a certain point. When you're drawing anime manga especially, you'll be able to point these points out super easily and you'll be able to put them into your work. And to find origin points, it's typically where all the hair is converging to. Sometimes there can even be 2 points that a hair is converging to. For this example here, it's just 1 point, so a lot of the hair is coming directly from that point and it's coming off of the character, and you're seeing sort of the effects of that and noticing how all the lines are going towards that converging point. You'll also be able to point this out a lot in sort of real life even, and you'll be able to see different elements and sort of how the hair interacts with the converging point. And this isn't Yuji Itadori. Next, I'll be showing an example of one of the greatest mangas of all time that has a character that has 2 converging points in their hairstyle. And simply because it has 2 converging points, it doesn't make the hairstyle any harder to draw. But, typically you will be looking for 1 converging point if you're looking at real life or specific hairstyles. The parting of the hair is important too for showing where your converging points are, but we can talk about that a lot more later when we actually talk about drawing black hair, because that's going to be an important element. And can you tell where I'm drawing right now? Leave a comment. And yeah, basically just adding these simple things to your characters can make it a lot easier and a lot more believable, and it's going to help your hair be more flowy. And here's some additional tips for drawing strands of hair. Naturally, you don't want to detail it too much, and you want to show where the hair is actually coming from. If you really think about it, the simple lines that you're drawing as detail are actually smaller strands of hair. You can also break apart these strands and make your hair a little more detailed. In addition, drawing more wavy hair, naturally the ends are going to be a lot more curvy. And when you draw sometimes characters with shorter hair, they might have it snipped like it was cut by scissors, and it will be a lot more straight across. Think of a bob cut or a bobcat cut. But these are basically the simple things that you need to know when you're drawing an average anime manga character. Next, we'll go over drawing black characters and black character hair. Essentially, what's important to get down first is the form. The form of the hair is going to be super important when you're drawing something like braids or plaits. In addition, getting down the parting of the hair for hair like cornrows is going to be super important. Since we're drawing a simplification, I think these small things are going to be really important to sort of show what kind of hairstyle you're actually drawing. I'll show you 3 examples, and I think all these examples will come in handy for any type of black hair that you end up drawing in the future. The braids themselves don't have to be too complex because we'll be going over them with black most of the time. However, I put some examples on the left here to show you sort of what a plait looks like. Typically, you could think of it like a rope wrapping around itself or something like that. Something extremely simple, and naturally the hair still converges all from 1 point, and it comes from a specific point and branches off of that. In this one, I'll have 2 converging points because the hair's going to be tied up behind, just like the example of Chizuru that we saw earlier today. You want to establish the actual shape first as loosely as you can, so a basic cylinder but more curvy and more wavy. And then after that you can go with the details in the braids. typically, depending on the style that you're going for, you really don't want to do too much. There's a lot of amazing hair tutorials out there about black hair, such as Likelihood Arts tutorial, which is super great on drawing more realistic braids or more braids with more detail, and it also goes over the sort of the idea behind drawing braids in general. But for me, I'm keeping it as simple as I can because my style isn't very complex, and essentially we want to get across what we can to just put down the most basic forms and get down the basic idea for anyone that views it. Typically anyone that views it is going to view it as black hair or braids or whatever, and it's going to be super simple that way. We don't need to go over detailed with all of these different how the braids actually look, because that will take a very long time, especially if we're working on a manga. And just so you know, typically I don't put this much detail underneath the hair itself. There's really no point, besides the parting and sort of the idea of braids and getting those down. There really is no need to go overboard and add too much detail to the braids, at least in my style. And I think with black hair specifically, there's a lot of different styles and ideas that you can get down, and it's super interesting the ways that you can actually create such interesting hairstyles. And as you can see, I'm finishing up the drawing here, and this is what typically I would shade it like and how it would end up looking in the end. And next we'll go into, again, drawing a basic character with some cornrows. Essentially the idea is going to be exactly the same. I'm going to be focusing on the parting and using a lot of reference to actually put together, an actual good hairstyle. When it comes to black hair, I think you're going to be using a lot more references than you do with a lot of different other hairstyles, because, there's so much interesting stuff to do. There's so many different kinds of hair textures too. So you really want to be careful when you're selecting your references. And here I'm keeping it super simple with the hair that I'm drawing, and it's nothing too complex. Again, if I was going to do this in manga, it would just be, a plain black, and maybe we get some lighting for the form. And actually we're still following the form of the head too, which is what I talked about earlier, and it's something that's going to be super important when you're actually drawing black hair when it comes to, not drawing volumetric hair like an afro or something like that, which we'll also be covering next. So the basic idea for an afro is pretty simple. Essentially you want to do typically some kind of curvy hair at the end. You don't want to end it with anything that's too sharp. When it comes to black hair, it's more flowy and more, fluid. So keeping that in mind, you want to create the silhouette of your hair to be super, fluid and round. So you draw the basic shape overall, like I have here, and outline it as if it was, a basic guideline. And then following the guideline, you create more, volumetric and loose flowing forms of hair, and then you put that down and you'll be able to add shading on top of that directly, sort of like how I'm doing here. I'm laying out simple sections to sort of put blacks down when it comes to this, and as you can see here, it really is just that easy. It's nothing too complex. Honestly, I think a lot of people think it's a lot harder than it is. As long as you're using references and you're sort of following those, I don't think it's too difficult. On top of that, these simple things can really be applied to any hairstyle. You could apply the same texture that you use here for someone who has jerry curls or some kind of hairstyle like that. It really, these basic principles, they apply to any kind of black hair that you would want to draw. On top of that, creating some kinds of loose strands, using, a Whyt tool or something like that, cutting into the hair and creating more individual shapes within that can make your drawings a lot more interesting and just better in general too. In addition, adding some kind of hatching if you're doing manga can make it better. Even if you're, even if you're doing like a colored illustration, you could still use the blacks and then on the outsides do some kind of brown. And for the little tiny strands of hair, you could add some kind of yellow or something for the backlight. Essentially what you're going for is sort of a natural kind of vibe, and doing that you have to draw a lot more flowy hair and more sort of organic shapes in general. You don't want anything that's too sharp, because then it doesn't look as believable or realistic, unless you're drawing more of a hairstyle that, stands up, like maybe my OC. And naturally, when you're adding additional strands to your characters, like loose strands of hair, there'll be specific hairstyles that you can use and others that you maybe won't want to use them on. For example, on an afro or dreads, you could probably use them, but when it comes to something like braids, it can look a little messy, which is typically not a style that you want to go for when it comes to your braids. But yeah, that's just my opinion. That's all from me. Peace out.